And over to you, Rabbi Silverman.
Thank you, Rabbi Stephen. Good morning to you all. Good morning. 50 years ago, Chief Rabbi Unterman passed away in Yerushalayim. Issa Yehuda Unterman was born around Pesach time in 1886 in Brisk. And when he was a boy, he was already known as an Elon, as a prodigy. And he learned with the Dayan of Brisk, Simcha Zaylid. And when he was 12 in 1898, he went with a number of others to form a beginning of a yeshiva called the Eitz Chaim in Malch. Malch is northeast of Brisk. And he continued learning. And when he got married to a lady called Rachel Yellin, and they eventually had blessed with 7 children, he learned in the Kollel of Volozhin. Now, you might remember when we were talking about Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, the Russian government closed down the river in 1892. But at the end of the 19th century, it reopened again on a smaller scale. And Rabbi Raphael Shapiro, who was the Natzib's son-in-law, he was the Rosh Yeshiva. And in the early 1900s, Issa Yehuda Unterman received samicha from Rabbi Shapiro and from the Dayan of Brisk, with whom he had learned as a youngster. Now we move on to when he was a rabbi in a number of communities in Russia. One was Mohilev. And then he was a powerful speaker. Even towards the end of his life, he was nearly 90 when he passed away. He was the most powerful speaker, and he was a great organizer. When the First World War broke out and the yeshiva world was dispersed throughout Russia and Poland, when the war ended, he was able to re-establish and help to reconstitute the yeshiva world. What's very interesting about him is that he was what we would call today a religious Zionist. He was a member of the Mizrahi movement. And in 1920, he became the Rav of Grodno. And he was the chairman of Mizrahi in Poland. We think today of Rabbonim being, as it were, right-wing. They were the Agudat HaRabbanim, but in those days you had many Rabbonim who were members of the Mizrahi movement. They believed passionately in Zionism and in what was then Palestine, Eretz Yisrael. In 1924, he was invited to become the rabbi of my hometown, Liverpool. So he moved over from Poland to Liverpool. Why did he do that? Because the rabbi who had passed away 3 years previously, Shmuel Yaakov Rabinovitz, had also been a passionate Mizrahi. He had been with Rabbi Reines, one of the founders of the Mizrahi movement, the worldwide movement. So when he came to Liverpool, it was already a Zionist community and it was a Mizrahi community. And when he came there, he started to organize the different organizations into one umbrella movement. He brought over youngsters from the continent to strengthen the yeshiva, which was in Liverpool, and he became honorary president of the Mizrahi movement in the United Kingdom. And then we come to the Second World War. And it was then that we know Liverpool was the second heavily bombed city after London, because it had all the docks you could go from there to America. And we know the Battle of the Atlantic, where so many ships were sunk by the Nazis. So Liverpool was an integral part of the British time at that Second World movement, where ships were coming over from America to Liverpool. We know that when the war started, many Jewish people were from Germany, and so they were interned as enemy aliens. And so and many of them were on the Isle of Man.
Yeah.
So he visited as many of them as he could. He wanted to strengthen the Yiddishkeit and help them as much as he could. And sometimes he did it at a great peril because the British authorities were not always very helpful with regard to what they termed the enemy aliens, even though they were innocent. In 1945, and he'd been in Liverpool just over 20 years. In 1945, Rabbi Moshe Avigdor Amiel, who was the Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, passed away. And Rabbi Unterman was invited to become the third chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. So in 1946, he moved to Eretz Yisrael. Well, it was in Palestine. He moved to Tel Aviv. And of course, he was there when the War of Independence happened, when Medinat Yisrael was established, and he brought together the Batei Din in Tel Aviv. He reorganized them because, as I mentioned, he was a great organizer. And in the 1950s, he became a member of the Bet Din Elyon, the most important Beis Din in Israel at the time, still is, the Bet Din Elyon in Yerushalayim. He also became a member of the Chief Rabbinate Council. And then he started writing his teshuvot, which were called Shevet Mihuda, after his own name. In 1964, he was invited to become the chief rabbi of Israel. So he moved from the chief rabbinate of Tel Aviv to the chief rabbinate of Israel. And he was there during the Six-Day War. And he was asked questions, for example, can you ascend the Temple Mount, the Har HaBayit? Can a woman become part of the Israel Defense Forces? Can organ transplants be permitted? So these were questions that had never been asked before. And he wrote them down in his Teshuvot book called Shevet Mihuda. In 1972, he retired. He was then 86. His mind was very, very fluent. I mean, it was amazing that he was able to do all these things at such an old age. He passed away in January 1976, as I mentioned, 50 years ago, and the Levi was held on Har HaZeitim. So he ascended from being in Russia and in Poland and in Liverpool. He has attained the two most important positions, rabbinic positions in the Jewish world, the third chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, the third chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael. And I must tell you that he was a great linguist, because when he came to Liverpool, he had to learn the English language as soon as he could, and he did. And the same thing, he spoke Yiddish, he spoke Ivrit, he spoke Polish, he spoke English. And he, as I mentioned, he attained those two important positions. What's also interesting is that Chief Rabbi Cook, the first Chief Rabbi, was a Kohen. Chief Rabbi Herzog was a Levi. Chief Rabbi Herzog was a Yisrael. What's also very interesting is that he wore a top hat. I don't know if you've seen photos. Yeah. Rabbonim, both in Israel, in Europe, and in America, of that generation, they wore the top hat because it was counted as something rabbinic. We don't think about that. We never would expect that today. But in those times, they did. Something else which is very interesting about Rav Unterman is there was an occasion when a lady held out her hand to him, and to those around, he took her hand, and to those around, he said, I'm a machmir. I'm very strict when it comes to things like that, but I'm also very machmir when it comes to embarrassing a person, that one should never do that kind of thing. And so this is the kind of person he was. He was from that, what we call the Musa Lithuanian background, where you know the right thing to do. And he was one of that generation. And we don't have these people anymore. But I just wanted to bring him to your notice that he was Issa Yehuda. Und interestingly, Issa stands for Yisachar, Issa Yehuda Unterman, that he was one of a generation who came into the modern world, attained those two high positions. And interestingly enough, when he was asked, can a person ascend the Harabayit? His answer was no. And you might remember that there were notices at the Kotel that said, please don't go any further than this. When it came to ladies going into the IDF, he said they could do Shnat Sherut, but they shouldn't actually go into the forces themselves. And with regard to organ transplants, he said when he realized that when the brain stem is dead, he said one is permitted to use the organs. And he was one of the first of that generation who said that it's permissible when we know for a fact that the brain stem is no longer working and the person is no longer alive, that you can straight away, if the person needs it, you can't leave the organs, but if you can transplant them right away, then you're allowed to do so. And of course, the heart transplant was, I think, the earliest. When Louis Vashkansky in Cape Town passed away, and they did that, Christian Barnard did that heart transplant at the end of the 1960s. He was the first one that had that done. Nowadays, it's a commonplace, but then at that time, it was a question that was asked.
There was a Rabbi Unterman who came to this conference. Was that his son?
He had two sons who were rabbis in England. Yes. Rabbi Abraham Unterman and Rabbi Morris Unterman. Yes.
South Tottenham.
Okay, that's as usual. Very, very interesting. Is there a question from this audience there?
Rabbi Unterman's brother,
Yes.
daughter married to Rabbi Apples.
Sorry, your brother. What are you saying?
Oh,
Rabbi
Dr. Alan Unterman, yes.
Yeah, Dr. Alan Unterman was his nephew.
Was his nephew, correct. Correct. That's right.
Because I'm related to the Untermans on that side.
Right.
Oh, you're famous, Bobby. You're famous, right? Okay.
Right. Yes.
Bobby,
and Dr. Alan Unterman actually said that he gave that instance of his uncle shaking hands, and said that this was something that he counted as very important. And you mustn't shame anybody. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'll say goodbye to those of you on Zoom, and we'll finish proceedings here.